Time more. More.
It stopped playing the noise. I forgot if you move off the button while it's playing it. Oh no, I've been warped. Oh no. Who's warped me?
Hey, now here's a guy with no worries.
No, I'm laden with worries. I'm leaden with worries and problems. Oh. Someone warped me in the pre. I said, okay, excuse me 1 second.
Thank you so much for triggering
the welcome down.
I love seeing new faces in the chat. I love seeing this community go from strength to strength.
Welcome in, everyone. We are going to be doing a...
Oh man, this is not a good time.
No, it's a great time. Come on in. Let me get myself comfortable. Yeah, there we go. I've added a little noise to it, which makes it feel nice. If you more warp me now... Oh yeah, I've made it more expensive and harder to do. for good reason. But now, when I more warp... I can't even more warp myself now. Yeah, I can. I can go to the button. And we'll be learning all about these buttons today. So if I more warp... I more warp myself... it's a bit too fast. Anyway, hello and welcome to SAMMI, the SAMMI tutorial stream. Often requested, never delivered. I'm a big evangelist of SAMMI. I think SAMMI can do a lot. I would love to encourage my streaming friends and stream curious friends to give SAMMI a little go. It is the program I use to make all of the many stream features that I complicate our downtime lives and entertainment with. Yes, it's very cold. I'm already overwhelmed. There's nothing to be overwhelmed by. I'd say about 1 hour and 15 minutes in, it might be a bit overwhelming, but it should on-ramp nicely, I think. SAMMI's not too bad. And the reason it might seem very complicated when I talk about what I'm doing is because I make very complicated things. But you don't have to. You don't have to do that. So let's just start with what SAMMI is. OBS, Open Broadcasting Software, is the thing that I presume most of us think about using for streaming. And what's good about the fact that that's an open source piece of software is it can communicate to third parties quite well. And SAMMI relies upon that to be a kind of external controller for a lot of stuff that goes on inside your OBS. And so you can use that to automate quite complicated things all at once and turn those into buttons. Will there be an exam? No, the exam is just whether or not you find it interesting. And then the VOD is just revision material. This might be more appropriate music. Yeah, there we go. So I believe that SAMMI, while a little bit fiddly, is relatively user-friendly and has a lot going for it. I think after a certain point, it might be easier just to try and do this within a program, but because I'm not really skilled in any programming languages, SAMMI is the perfect crutch for me. And we could talk about in basics how SAMMI works. So if you've ever seen inside my SAMMI, I've got a lot of panels and a lot of things going on here. But within this, oh, does it do that every time I do that? Yeah, we don't want that. That's mad. That's mad. I'll fix that. First of all, I'm going to disable the sound effect. If that's too much. So you can see in these panels here that SAMMI works in what it calls buttons. The reason it calls them buttons is because you can configure these individual buttons into a stream deck of some kind, and you can hotkey them all up. Hello Pete, hello Maggie, hello Cressup, hello Brent Santa, hello Mono, hello Baldy. And because they're buttons, they work in a very simple if then that construction. They rely on a trigger, and then after that trigger there will be an output. So you can think of the functionality button in two ways. On one hand, it can be triggered by stuff. You'll notice that a lot of the stuff I do is triggered by text, reading the chat. However, it can also be triggered by hotkeys. It can be triggered by keywords. It can be triggered by channel point redemptions. It can be triggered by Twitch events such as raids, follows. It can be triggered by various extensions. SAMMI now has its own version of SAMMI Voice, so it can even be triggered by voice commands. You can even just have things that are triggered by timers, so they just trigger regularly, like the way Nightbot puts certain say certain things into chat at regular intervals. And they can also be triggered by other buttons, but that's getting a bit complicated. And so on one hand, you can look at your triggers. So here's a bunch of things that could appear in the Twitch chat: tog text, toggle text, t-text. So if you type any of those into the chat, it will then do this very simple output. So here is your commands, and this is just a bunch of individual steps that it will take if that trigger happens. So again, we've got the trigger. That says if this thing happens, if this condition is met, then all these lines of essentially code, different JSON things it will do, will happen. And so here, if you were to write t-text, it just toggles this text. Okay, so we've got two commands here. Number one is toggle source visibility, which everything in OBS is referred to as a source. And there's a command that toggles its visibility. If it's visible, make it invisible. If it's not visible, make it visible. And then it will play a sound effect. And I've just made it this clicking thing. T-text. While I'm talking, to make sure I don't rush off and people can ask questions, there is a voice channel open in the Discord called SAMMI Tutorial. If anyone wants to pop in that and query something, obviously this is not doesn't look like it's a busy stream or anything, so if you have questions here in the chat, just let me know as well. But so far, is that followable? Is that like a... You understand what I'm saying? I haven't left anything out that has thrown anyone off. Yeah. A slightly more advanced one. So that is toggle text. What if you wanted to change that text? So the trigger it looks for here, it has this asterisk after it. SAMMI treats asterisks in a text trigger like a wildcard. And so this set of commands is a tiny bit more complicated. First, it's going to pull the wildcard. So it's going to grab that wildcard. Wildcard number 0. You could stack wildcards. I could say text this, and then this, and then this, and it would look for 4 different pieces of text that follow !T text, and then you could number them. But we don't want that. We just want whatever comes after ttext, it's going to save that as the variable text. And then if we put a variable in 2 forward slashes and 2 dollar signs, that knows to call that variable rather than print that text. And so if we put that in the text mark box I've called example, it will change it. So ttext, and if we were to say ttext burger, bang, it says burger now. And I've also put this orchestra hit sound effect in there, just for a little bit of flair. Could also say aardvark. It could say brown crab, and then when we're done with it, we get rid of it again. This, I think, is the nuts and bolts of your 101 usage of SAMMI. You just decide a little thing you want to do, and it can get called by a piece of text. Or if you didn't want anyone else to see it, and I didn't want, I wanted this for me. I was streaming and I wanted to be able to call up a bunch of things at once and put them away at the same time. I could say I don't want it to be triggered by text. I want it to be triggered by a hotkey. It's when I press Control T, for instance. And then when I press Control T, bang, 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 bang. Hello, RK. Do I need to go back? You've already done a bit of SAMMI, haven't you? So I'm just doing the basics now, so you'll know all of this. And then ttext will toggle the visibility. And then something slightly more complicated here. So, what if we wanted to rescale to a random scale? So we could say exclamation mark text size. And it would rescale it, but to a random scale. That's a horrible scale. Pick a scale where we can read it. That's not good either. It's too random. There we go. And so this one is a tiny bit more complicated, and I'll talk through how it works. So the first thing it's going to do here is it's going to look for the existing scale of this text box, and it's going to save those 2 variables. It needs to know the X scale and it needs to know the Y scale, and we're going to save those 2 here as X scale and Y scale. So now we know the current size of the box. Then we're going to randomize some new scales between 0.1, which would be about 10% of the default size, and then 3, which is 3 times the default size. We'll do that for the X coordinate, we do that for the Y coordinate, and then we've got a motion command, which is the basis of animation in SAMMI, where you just put in your beginning variables, your beginning size or position or rotation, whatever it is you're applying a motion command to, and then your end ones, and then it'll just tween between the 2. It will just take it from one to the other over an amount of time that you denote. And again, it'll just play the sound effect, and that just resizes it. And again, I can change these. If we just wanted it to be a little bit more subtle and not completely over the top, we can take it from 1 to 1.5 as the maximum and minimum bounds. And that's not as much. It's not as bad. So those are just 3 very basic examples of what you could do. When it comes to looking at what SAMMI is capable of, when you look at a command, there is quite a lot you could get through it. SAMMI Bridge is about communicating with some plugins and extensions. Utilities, you can add a comment. Like in programming, you add a comment to your script to let you know what's happening. Overtime is SAMMI's version of like a cooldown. OBS event pull. This allows you to pull the information of something that's happened in OBS. Normally you want to pair that with a trigger that relates to it, so that kind of thing has happened. Like something's been deleted, a new object has been added. And then you've got a lot of basics that you might want. You can switch scene. You can change the transition between a scene. You can pull the values of information relating to a source. How big is this image? Where is this image located on the screen? Sometimes if you want to animate an image such that it moves from one position to another, first you should know where it is so you can animate it from that position, so you can give the start values to the movement command. You can change the visibility, scale, rotation. You can change the text in a text box. You can change the volume of some music. You can mute a source. You can create a source. You can delete a source. You can duplicate a source. You can change the settings or the visibility of filters that apply to sources. You can stop and start media. You can't do absolutely everything, but for a vast majority of the discrete commands that you can see in OBS, you can either emulate them being carried out in SAMMI, or you can specify how they should be carried out with SAMMI. Then you've got your numbers, text and variables. This is a lot for when you want to be either handling text or you want to be saving data. On the more complicated end of SAMMI, you want to be saving variables or saving information. Let's say you want to save how many times people have said egg in one session. You might want to track something. Delete that. You can't leave a button with variables not set because that would make it crash. So let's say we wanted a tracker. What would be an interesting word to track? Balloon. So let's say it's triggered by saying balloon. But we also want it to be triggered by people saying balloon in a sentence. We want it to be triggered by people who say balloon in the middle of a sentence, people who say balloon at the end of a sentence, or people who say balloon and then say more things in their sentence. And for this, we need an initial variable. So an initial variable is the default value that a variable will have when SAMMI is loaded. SAMMI doesn't save things externally as standard, so if SAMMI were to crash or you turn SAMMI off, whatever's happened in that session is gone, unless you've told it to save something externally in a text file, in an INI, in a CSV. Let me know if I'm pacing this explanation right. I thought there'd be more happening in the chat, so I feel like I'm rushing at a speed that might not be conducive to everyone following. This is good? Is this the right speed? I don't want to race ahead because then I feel I'll lose people. So yeah, when you right click, I think it gets complicated. Yeah, I think it will, but then it becomes less important, because then everything that I think is important to have known will have already been covered. So when you right click on a button, you can edit its appearance. So mostly it's just useful for colors. Obviously, as you can see with DOM DeLuise there, you can also add images. The settings, we'll cover that later probably. Then there's your triggers, then the commands. Release commands are not for us really. They're for people who use an actual deck, and so when they let their finger go off a button, it can do something. And then here are the initial variables. So again, just if anyone doesn't have any experience of like programming, a variable is just saving a piece of information. So you save a piece of information and you give that a name, in the same way that you might write the word dog down in a text in WordPad and then save that and give that file a name. A variable is just, you've saved something, a number or a piece of text, and you've given that a name. So let's say we're going to say balloon counter. Balloon counter, and its initial variable, I think I've got to put that in speech marks to make that correct for JSON, is 0, because at the beginning no one said balloon. And then we'll quickly reset SAMMI so that it's starting from like a fresh session. And so when we look in here, balloon counter is at 0 in the top left. Would balloon not cover everything as a trigger? Strangely not, actually. but we'll test that. Because my understanding is if you write balloon with asterisks, with wildcard asterisks on both sides, it will require things to be there on both sides. So if you wrote balloon on its own, that wouldn't count. Or if you wrote balloons, that wouldn't count because it thinks there should be something at the beginning. So in here is everything that we want to happen. Josie, you can do that. I have got that to work, and I have, for a while, I used some things. I've got a little MIDI Arturia keyboard in front of me, and I thought about, just using it as an extensive array of hotkeys. But you could also just get it to play sound effects and just use it as a MIDI keyboard that plays directly into OBS. Okay. So if we just wanted it to say how many times someone has said balloon, this is just a useful little programming exercise, and you'll see how it works in SAMMI. So we'll set a local variable. Now, because balloon counter is already set as a variable, that already exists, so we're not defining it, we're going to modify it. So the variable name is balloon counter, and then our operator is plus equals, and it plus equals 1. So we've incremented it up once. And then we should say how many times. So we'll do Twitch reply, and we'll say balloon has been said, and then we call that variable, which is called balloon counter, which means we use 2 forward slashes, and within that 2 $signs. And then that should work. Balloon counter. Balloon. Oh, balloons didn't work. Okay, so you're right. Balloons didn't work. So for that, and that goes to show Red Key that is not as powerful as you'd hope. Just the 2 on either side. Oh, is T-Text still up? Don't forget you can get rid of that. So we'd also need balloon like that, and I guess balloon like this. Okay, balloons now should work. Balloons. What? Maybe if I save the whole board? Yeah, okay. There you go. It's a simple tracker. No, sometimes you need to save the button, but then you need to save the whole board. Buttons go in boards. I thought there'd be another layer to that, but yeah. Buttons live in boards, and sometimes you have to save a button and then save the board for a change to go through. So what if we don't want it to say balloon counter every single time? This is what I did with eggs recently, and it was too much. So let's say how would we do that? Well, we could add a new initial variable and call this balloon counter counter, and it tells us how many times the balloon counter's gone. Okay, let's reinitialize SAMMI again. This will lose our previous balloon tracking, but just to check everything's still working. Balloon's been said 1 time, and let's also increment up balloon counter counter. But balloon counter counter is only going to be used to determine when we type the result of the balloon counter in the chat, whereas balloon counter is genuinely counting all the balloons. And the reason that is so is we can put an if in, and we can say if balloon counter counter is greater than 4, which means if it's 5, then we will tell chat, and we will reset balloon counter. So here we will set the operator to equals, and balloon counter is reset down to 0. So now we should need to say balloon 5 times in total. Then it will tell us that balloon has been said 5 times. Balloon. Okay. It is slow to save sometimes. Balloon? Oh, of course, it was responding. I've just programmed it to not always tell me. And now we won't hear about it again until it's 11? Yeah. So, I mean, those are just some simple... Oh, and then if you want a random number generator, this is another one that's very simple to understand. So if you put RNG and then a number, it's going to pull that wildcard, which is the thing that follows. So exclamation mark RNG space and then a number. It's going to pull that wildcard and call that the variable roll. Then it's going to, I'm using the random function, which creates a variable called RNG. The minimum possible value it could be is 1, but the maximum is whatever number you put in for roll, and then it prints out you rolled a D roll and got an RNG. So if we just said RNG 20, you rolled a D20 and got a 7. Does that make sense? Can you follow how that works? I'm trying to give you real basic examples, but also things that maybe you want to do something similar to. Okay, that's good. Yeah, everything beyond that really is the ultra complex hinterland. So the basic nuts and bolts of SAMMI is that you have a board, and in a board you make things like this. All of these are buttons. They have a discrete trigger condition, and within that they can have as many commands as you like. Where things get more complicated is that buttons can interact with other buttons, and you can use that to make more complicated programs, essentially. So those variables, buttons can read and write each other's variables, and they can trigger each other. I think they can even delete each other. So at once that allows for more complicated things, but also I think in a nice way, it helps you arrange your program so that its discrete functions are like labeled and written out for you. Like if you see, for instance, the infinite referendum, this is how it is laid out. It's not very pretty, but start a new referendum is right there. The script for generate results is here. End and reset, just behind the chat box. That's there. I often make things that start a program green and things that end and reset them red. And for individual votes, for submitting new answers. Because the tricky thing with something like the infinite referendum, which made it took a long time before I knew how to make stuff like this or had figured it out, is because it can't go in one button. There needs to be one line of code that's going to start the referendum. There needs to be another that is, because each button needs a trigger, you need something. You can't have the thing that does the vote triggering the same thing unless you you could literally put everything in one button. What you do is everything that you'd want to trigger stuff that related to the infinite referendum, you'd then have to put something in that code that then looks and sorts the different words that could have triggered it and gone, is this a number between 1 and 100 for votes? Is this exclamation mark IR and then a question? So starting the new referendum, these will all look a bit more complicated, but they do all break down. In fact, yeah, I've commented some of this for my own benefit. This clears the activity arena, so you don't have something up in the ticker in the top left. Then it updates the ticker to say the referendum is active. Then, if state is 0, that's a very simple state tracker. It's just making sure there isn't already an infinite referendum active. I didn't want someone to be able to make an infinite referendum when there was one going. All of this stuff with clamping is just so it can do that information of slowly writing the text. I think the polls are organised a bit more like a flowchart. So you've got the poll title, then you've got the voting, and then you've got announce winner. This deletes the username, so it saves people's usernames so you know who's voted. And these are the individual animations for voting option 1, option 2, option 3, and option 4. I think the original randomizer looked a lot nicer, but then when I made it again, it's a lot more drab. But I knew what I was doing then. I don't think I needed to lay it out for my own brain's sake. Is there any... is there any questions people have at this point? Are there any things of mine that you'd like to understand how they work? Are there any cases you'd like to ask about? In fact, one example, the Dungeon Duke, he is made entirely using...
You hear the Dungeon Duke? Oh, where is he? Just his turkey leg is here. Where are you, Dungeon Duke? Oh, VideoTube's not on, of course. Let's get VideoTube running. So I realised, you know, for little PNG tubey people. Oh, where's the Dungeon Duke? Dungeon Duke. Normal. And shouting. Change image. Shouting. Hello? Yeah, there he is. Hello? Hello? Good.
Hello?
Great. So there's a recursion on him that doesn't need to be there. Maybe I'll remove it. Maybe I should have removed it a long time ago. So the way the Dungeon Duke works is that his sword and his stick of lamb, I wanted those to just periodically come up and rotate random amounts. So that it just feel a little bit more organic than someone's just bopping up and down. And that is just in here with a repeat interval of 5,005 milliseconds for the sword and 4,505 milliseconds for the lamb, so that they desync and they wouldn't just be coming up and down at the same time. And again, it just RNGs both for the timing and for the rotation, and then just does it, and then just waits for it to trigger itself again. Not the best animation ever, but these little simple things you could do really easily. 1, 2. Yeah, you can see all the old stuff I've done, the old side quests, the Mugs versus Eggs tournament, RIP the Queen for the Queens. I kept this because this had a lot of interesting. I keep all my old boards so I can cannibalise stuff that I figured out. She is risen, she is reset. These won't do anything now because the assets they're supposed to control are gone. A lot of these are just tweaking animations, really, and moving things around. The King's Speech, the button that does it all. So the way the King's Speech works, remember that, is it would have multiple triggers. You have to say KS, and then it would either accept you saying 3 words or 2 words, and then it would save all those words as numbers, but then it would scramble them. Jose Hypatia worked out the scrambling in the end. Yeah, it would say word 1, word 2, word 3, word 4, word 5, word 6. Punctuation. Oh yeah, and then it would pick a random punctuation mark. Based on... yeah, it would roll a random punctuation number between 1 and 3. and then between 0 and 3, sorry, which means it could have 4. Yeah, I think that's it really. I've looked slightly into, like, could you make a full game in here? And you could, more or less. I don't think anyone would advocate that over using like a simple game engine over this. But I looked into, like, could you make game logic that like has different scenes and prints out different bits of text? Could you make a adventure game in here? And yeah, you could. You could definitely make an adventure game in here. What if you wanted to assign the Queen to a specific viewer? What do you mean? Oh, because the Queen spoke to individual people. Sorry, everyone could speak as the Queen, which I think was Talk as Quen. So, Talk as Quen, it would change the visibility of zombie.mp3. This was before I was playing sound effects through SAMMI. I was just turning on the visibility of sound effects. It was then going to change the opacity. A lot of this is just animation. It would move the Queen up and down, and then it would change the contents of the text box. Yeah, I mean, red, look. Spotlight red Kyo. That's what you're asking about, right? You're now this dick. Okay, yeah, how does that work? How did I make that? Where is that? Spotlight, here we are. Yeah. Okay, so here's my Spotlight board. So we've got Spotlight User, which puts you there in the first place. Then we've got the text parser, and we've got Unspotlight. Oh, and then this is for starting the trial and ending the trial. Yeah, okay. So, Spotlight User, what does that do? It looks for the broadcaster, or a mod. You can see those. Sometimes I have to not allow you to do certain things. So it looks for Spotlight, and then it looks for a wildcard. So it's going to pull that wildcard and save that as username. That's the username we're going to be looking for. Then there's a random RNG between 1 and 14. I don't know why that's there, because nothing seems to call that variable anywhere. Am I still in... Yeah, sure. I didn't know that it was
in normal voice. Is what the picture? Does the RNG... Oh, of course! You're absolutely right. It must use that RNG to determine which animal. Yes, very good, yes, of course. So, let's go through this sequentially. It's going to look for the wildcard in my command, save that as username, then it's going to pick a random number between 1 and 14, and there are 14 animals. Then it's going to lowercase the username. Then it's going to change the visibility of something in Spotlight. Spotlight is a subscene I have of 14 animals that live in the bottom left corner of the screen. And then here, it's actually calling that variable RNG in the thing that searches for a source in that scene. So it's going to pull animal and then the number we randomized. It's going to change that label to your username in lowercase. As you can see, there it is. At the bottom of the legs of the dick. Then the Spotlight text, it's going to change to nothing. So it isn't... so the text box still doesn't have the text in it from last time. Because while SAMMI might not remember things from one session to the last, OBS just remembers where everything is. You can make a real mess in your stream. Next day come to it and it's still a mess. And it's also going to ensure that those two things are visible. That's visible. That's visible. Then we're going to set local variable Spotlight to 1. That's just a state tracker. So that other buttons know that the Spotlight is on and can check. And there's this sound effect for the beginning of Spotlight. Then there's the text parser. So the text parser has to listen to everything. Because because the only way I could figure out to get this to work is that it listens to everything that goes in the chat and just works out what's being said by Red Quixote. So it's going to pull the message of any message, and it's also going to pull the username. So when, again, I mentioned this earlier, when something in text on Twitch or YouTube or wherever you stream in triggers SAMMI, you can pull the data of that trigger and see what it has. So in terms of this, you could, if it was in Twitch chat, you could pull the username, the display name, the user ID, which is like the unique identifier of that user in Twitch, the message ID, the emote list, badge list, channel, the name color, whether or not they're a first-time chatter, or from channel ID. I don't understand what all of these mean. You can also like pull if someone's a low trust user. You can have like hype trains as triggers. There's lots of things I haven't found a use for. But when you open up SAMMI, look through it, you'll realize there's a lot of things that can trigger a button and a lot of things a button can do, much of which I have never used, and you won't see any examples of it on my stream. So it's going to pull the message, going to pull the username, going to lowercase the username. Then we're going to format the message so it can't be more than 50 characters in a line, otherwise that's when you get text boxes that just write off the screen. Then we're going to get the button variable from the last button we looked at, and that button variable we're going to look at is spotlight user, who is the user that was spotlighted in the previous button. And we're also going to want to know what was the RNG for the animal. I don't know why we call that one number 5 there. I don't know why that's there. I don't comment things well enough. So if the spotlight user, the one that we manually spotlit in the other button, is the username that's currently talking, great, then we're going to proceed. We're going to do voice RNG for which of these it's going to say. There are 57 voice lines. Then there's a random animal RNG. Oh, of course, animal RNG, and then that's going to change. We're also going to modify the pitch of the voice lines randomly just to try and make it sound like it's not repeating the same things. Then this is a script you'll see me use a lot. It's just that, it's, you know how if you do activity SAMMI tutorial, it'll just prints out letter by letter. I use and recycle this script all the time. In fact, it would have behooved me by now to make it its own unique button that I just push stuff into. Essentially what it's going to do is it's going to save your text, and it's saved it still as activity because I have just copied these buttons out from the activity tracker. So it's going to save the activity, but then it's going to clamp it. And that clamping starts at the very beginning. It's going to clamp it to nothing. And a clamp is just, let's say you've got a line of text that's 100 characters long, and you do clamp at 25, you just save the first 20 characters and save that as a separate variable. And then we're going to do a repeat interval. Repeat intervals are very useful, very important, but also very tricky. You basically, much like an if-then, where you've got this kind of big orange box, and anything that's in the orange box only occurs if the condition of that if-then is satisfied. A re-enable is what SAMMI calls it, is that anything in this box is going to get triggered over and over again according to the repeat interval, which is a value in milliseconds. So if you had 1,000 in there, it would do it every second. And then the second thing is the amount of repetitions it would have. So for here, the repeat interval is randomized between 10 and 50, and the amount is the same as the amount of characters, because here we've done a get length plus 1. So it's going to only do it as each time it's going to clamp it, but 1 less. So the text will appear to grow, and it will do that only as many times as there are characters, because that's as many times as we need it to get that effect. And then it will also play a keystroke. Oh, we don't want the keystroke here because I thought it would sound weird if it sounded like the animal was typing. So it's still here because I've copied out these boxes from elsewhere, but I thought the keyboard sound, it feels weird if a dick feels like it's typing, so I got rid of that. So each time the clap number grows, +1. Is this to accommodate longer messages so it doesn't fill the screen? No, that's just this at the top. String format, number 3 here is that. String format just allows you to limit characters per line. So if you've got a 70 character line, your character per line limit is 50. At 50, it'll do a carriage return. This is just to get the effect. I just think it looks nice. If you can say something again, Red, and see how when you talk, the text box isn't full to begin with. It moves on, but it moves on very fast. I thought it would look odd if it was strange. With the activity ticker showing the text typing animation. This one's quite slow. Maybe too slow, honestly. But I like it. That's all this is doing that we've been talking about. And that last little bit here is source motion. That's the reason it needed to know the animal's RNG number, because it wants to animate that animal. And so it's going to move the animal up 100 pixels for 1/10 of a second, just so it animates up when it talks and it looks a bit better. And then unspotlight, just rather than find out what animal we need to unspotlight, we just turn the visibility off for all animals. We play that noise, and we delete the variable from the initial button that denotes who is spotlighted, and we just change it to the number 0. No one's going to come into Twitch chat who is the number 0, so spotlight is essentially unspotlighted. And then we have start trial. That start trial is the one that places us here, and it moves you over here. I haven't designated what this trial is about, but then let's say we end the trial. I'll give Red a more point. And then we end it. Probably a lot going in this one. This one's a bit too complicated. But yeah, I think the spotlight was a good one. Anything else people want to ask about? Sean Morley's normal game is by far the most... Oh, we're still here, are we? Sean Morley's normal game is by far the most complicated one I've ever made. There's much too much going on here. It manages the rules. It manages the points. It manages... It's still got the haiku one from the One Haiku special. For the people who wanted to know more about SAMMI, is there anything else that you want to know? I think everything beyond here is just about the specific fiddly methods for making certain things. In terms of the boards that I've got to show you, this is just the stream elements triggers. This is redeemables, stuff that comes from channel points. Triggerables, stuff that comes from your text. Mauls tools. This is really just for my outro and roll call and stuff that was just going to be for me to deal with. A lot of the stuff here is not really that important. Normal game. Then there's rounds, which was the thing in normal game. It was just this, like next round. Yeah, where's the animation? Round title animation. Yeah, that's all that is. It just moves things that live forever on the very edges of the screen. There's a million things that live on the very edge of the screen, like all the fish. So the fish just chooses a random point, a random start point, a random middle point, a random third point, and uses a command called position curve, which allows an object to go between position A and B, but it can do so in a curved motion. So by trying to maintain that curve while picking an apex and picking a departure point, a lot of the time it looks quite nice. You know, the fish comes up, stops, and because you've got an in and out smoothing on the animation, it looks all right. And again, it works a bit like how the it works a little bit like how the spotlight animal was chosen. You choose a random fish, fish RNG between 1 and 8, and then it's going to change the rotation angle of fish, and then we pull that variable of the random number we've chosen. There's the welcome bears, which essentially just chooses a random number between 1 and 22, and then I've got the same thing repeated over and over and over again, which is mostly the same except for which of the 22 welcome bear videos it turns on at the end. This is egg, which is more complicated than ever. And in fact, I've got a counter here, which now should only tell people how many times people have said egg every 5 eggs. Intro and outro. These are honestly quite useful. Anyone who wants to do streaming, I find it really useful when I want to set up pre-stream mode. It used to be I'd sit down and I had like a whole, okay, set this up, this is what the pre-stream looks like. I just put it all in one button. Pre-stream, I sit down, I go... And now this is all just controlled by one button. That made my life a lot easier. I mean, that's enough. That's all one button. That's really useful. The outro's all one button. Even though the outro does several things, including it prints the text list of everyone who watched on the left, and it triggers some clips, and only clips from... Sorry, one of the things I've told it to do is to start playing some background music. It should also, at regular intervals, it should play a clip. It should observe how long the clip it's pulled is, and then for that amount of time, plus between 5 and 10 seconds, it waits and then triggers itself again to hopefully pull a clip from as recently as possible. So at the end of a stream, rather than do, 6 or 7 things, I could just go, run this button, bam.
Crow.
Ooh. Corvid's out. I am still here. It would have been a funny way to leave. Then there's the polls. The polls was the first very complicated thing I made, and honestly, I think they're held together with sellotape. I just don't want to go through doing it again. Infinite Referendum was arguably harder, but I had a lot more experience then. The question matrix, we don't even use it. Oh yeah, I forgot it still does that. Stop it. Question matrix, we don't really use that so much, but we do have it. We've got the guessing, if you want to guess. We don't really use that either. More points, we love these. Oh, we love these here. Oh, we can't get enough of these. Yes, you've got +1 more point, -1 more point check self, more point check other, more point leaderboard, more point leaderboard. More point loser board. Do we have a loser board? More point loser board. I don't remember this. MP loser board. MP loser board. What's that? Yeah, it's just whoever's got the least. Who's fucked? It's fun finding things I don't remember about. Add fun fact self, add fun fact other, more point trends and more point tracker. Yeah, I forgot about that. More point trends. MPT. Yeah, none. All right. Do you know what? That's not even true, but I've reset SAMMI a couple of times. Infinite referendum. Probably not the most complicated thing I've made, but only because I learned how to... I figured out ways of making it in a way that wasn't as complicated as it needed to be. The only thing you can see that's very messy about this is that I really struggled to get it to delete the votes that might still be hovering on their journey to the thing they're voting for at the time that the referendum ends. And so, do you see how many times it says delete votes here? That's how many votes plus 1 would need to be on the screen for it not to be able to delete everyone's votes and someone's username just hovers on the screen forever. That is a fault. I just haven't found a way to do that better. Randomizer number 2. Here's the bingo. I decided it was easier because I didn't know how to designate. Because it's a 5x5 grid, I couldn't think of... And I wanted 3 people to have to play against each other. Could you not predict how long it waits to take and then clear? But here's the issue. This is very advanced what we're going to talk about. I think this is beyond the scope of what we're talking about. But because you've asked, I'll attempt to answer why it's so tricky. So, infinite referendum, example text, answer, ducks, sheep, horses. So, in infinite referendum, when you cast a vote, it needs to allow button overlap. I made this call because if we had a lot of people in, if we had like 60 people in for a stream and they're all voting at once, it wouldn't feel good that only one vote goes, because it takes a vote at present. It takes a vote 10 seconds to make its way across the screen. And if 15 people voted and it was queued, one of those would go across the screen for 10 seconds, then another would go across the screen for 10 seconds. Instead, I think it looks a lot nicer that when people vote, it's going to start animating their username as soon as possible. And so you can see how active the poll is in real time with how many noises you hear and how many usernames you can see. But here's where the issue comes from, right? Every time someone votes, it's handled by this button. And I've chosen... We didn't mention this earlier, but here's settings, right? You can allow queue, and allowing a queue means, for example, if someone does a Tom warp, the warp completes, and in the middle, someone goes, I want a Tom warp too. And he goes, okay, I'll wait until I've finished everything in this button, and then I'll do the second Tom warp, which is fine. But here, we're allowing the button to overlap. And this is where issues come in. Because there are variables and it's handled by the same button. So if in the middle you could have variables that were set for the first usage of a button interfere with the behavior of the second usage. So if in the old poll system, the way the old polls work is that it might show usernames going to the wrong place. Oh no, here's what you'd have, sorry. It would allow button overlap, and here's what would happen. There are 4 poll options on the top right hand side of the screen. And let's say Pete has voted, and Pete's username is going from the left to the right, so that it can go in and show Pete's voted for, you know, horse. But in the middle of that, while Pete's username is still like halfway in the middle of the screen, red votes for horse. And it's allowing button overlap. It will suddenly change Pete's name to red. And it will look like, oh, 2 people's votes have been compressed into one vote, and so the voting's wrong. in the end, it's not true, because the thing that would handle the numbers was separate to the animation, but it wouldn't look right for someone's username to change in the middle. But because you've got, it would inherit and change the text box midway through, and the polls no longer do that. There is some kind of funkiness on the timings of when the bars change, but here we don't want that. But the difficulty comes in telling a button that allows overlap what text box to delete. So it takes 10 seconds. You've got a button and you're telling this button, here's a username, but we just have to call it username 20. It's the 20th username we've received in this infinite referendum. You can't say remove username 20 because I'm just using a counter, right? So if I can find it. Where's the tracker? Yeah, here we go, num. We're using vnum, vote number. That's our tracker. So every time someone votes, vnum ticks up by 1. And we make a new text box. Here it is. And here's all the text box data. That's a bit advanced, making a source and giving all of its settings like that. So honestly, don't worry about that. It's tricky, and you need to know all the right syntax to make it work. But we're making a new text box, and we're calling it V for vote, and then number, which is a variable that just ticks up every time someone votes. And so that moves to the other side of the screen. And in the middle of that, let's say vnum1 has been created and it's gone across, and now vnum2 has appeared before vnum1 has got to the end. vnum2 is here. Now, you can't say, how do we tell it? Oh, by the way, when the end of that gets over there, delete it. Because you're like, well, we've got a button. It knows that we've got a variable called num, which now equals 2. And we can't say, oh, at the end of this time, -1 from num and delete that. Because there might be more than one vote. There might be 3 votes that come in this time. And we might end up deleting vote number 3 even before it reaches the end. So in the end, the only thing I could find was to cycle through this like 35 or so buttons and tell that to handle that because I couldn't handle it within the vote button. Would the easy way be to find correct conditions to be what you make to need an OBS and then copy pit sessions? I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, Red. I don't completely understand the question, I'm afraid. Oh, sorry. To the easiest way to find what the stuff that you can use to create a source. There is a way you can pull something settings. So yes, but that also requires. That's also quite advanced. You can. That's also quite advanced. But yeah, you can do that. And sometimes you can just pull a setting and save that setting as a variable and then pass that setting on. But again, I find it a bit wonky, and I find troubleshooting it doesn't work on significantly the more harder end of using SAMMI. But you can do it. And one thing you can do as well, if you're doing like an animation, you can pull like some basic information about a setting, like a text box or an image. However, there will be a delay. It's not instantaneous. And for reasons like that, you see on the right here, every command has a delay marker. And you need to be quite savvy about what commands take a few milliseconds to process and make sure that everything that relies on that process having been completed is a few milliseconds after. For a lot of stuff, you don't need it. For a vast majority of the things you see here, it's only really important for making animations look correct. But sometimes if you're trying to get a lot of information from OBS, and sometimes you can't get information from OBS while other things are happening, there is some jank in how those two things communicate. That is predominantly on the making info requests of OBS. When it comes to sending stuff to OBS, you got no problem. So visually and then copy that as a template. Yeah, you can. But the actual pull information from OBS stuff and then display it in the same format that you can use in the create source command is tricky. So to some degree, it's better off just having a template of what the create source command looks like for something that you're familiar with. I think in learning the syntax might be inevitable. Or even just learning the bits of the syntax that are relevant to you. I didn't use it for very long, but it's just to show that it could be done. Do It For Her, which was the Paddy pre-scene, where you could set an image on an easel for Paddy to react to. That pulls an image from the internet. And then sets that into, and then makes that an image scene in OBS. But because I didn't want people to be able to put porn or something in there, I had to make a validator that would send it to a different scene so I could look at it and go, that's not pornographic. And then I'd say yes. That was more trouble than it was worth, and I never really worked with images much after that because of the inherent risk that someone will send something that you just don't want on the screen. Yeah, I tried to make a game of Space Invaders. Can't do collision. You just can't do collision. I couldn't find a way to make the. I couldn't find a way for anything to know for sure if a bullet was touching an alien. So it's not a game engine. I need to stop using it as such. Pete would have put porn on there. Yeah. Pete's looking at this now thinking, I'll use this to put porn on my stream. Hello, Stevesy. I've just talked my head off about SAMMI for about an hour. And I think anything else I cover now is too much. Is that what I'm thinking? That's what I'm hearing. Oh yeah, we don't need ducks, sheep and horses, but I'm glad they got equal amounts of votes. It's nice to see a clear tie between ducks, sheep and horses. Alright. I've run through all my plan of the stuff I wanted to say. Can you get a SAMMI channel or a thread on the Discord somewhere? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wonder where that would go. Bring that up on the Discord at some point. Pop that in the Discord and I will let the Discord think about it. Maybe it could just go under Streams General. Yeah, but that's that. I don't want to sit and prevaricate longer than I have. I don't think I've got anything else useful to say. That's just SAMMI and how I use it. I hope someone who was curious and just wanted to see how it works is satisfied. What's purgatory? Oh yeah, it's stuff that I think I've sacked off, like wide mode. These are just some things from Morevision, RoboWogan, the Brain Fight, Submarine Quest, Submarine Up, Submarine Down, Hit. When I realised you couldn't do collision, I made a button in for hit. So you know when we did Terry Wogan's Submarine Fight, I just had to look with my eye and be like, that's hitting. That shark's touching the submarine. And then I just pressed the button for collide. Because I couldn't, there's not a collision detection, right? It's not a game engine. So I was just there being like, that's hit it. That's hit it. I think it was just like Control H. Yeah. But you never knew, did you? You never knew. Looked real. Looked like a real game. Here's fast mode. Fast mode needs to come out of retirement at some point. This deals with the timer. That's how many seconds are remaining. Name, spoke, dickhead. I think it needs to, when someone speaks, it needs to check if they're a dickhead, I think. Yes, because if dickhead speak, it speeds up the timer. This is the trap observer, so you put in here everything that's a trap. This changes the interval. This resets and deletes rows, don't know what that's for. Block term, unblock term, get all of the blocked terms. That was a test. Fast mode is really good. It needs something. I would happily bring it back, but there's just, it needs something. There's some secret mayonnaise missing from this burger, if you know what I mean. If you're familiar with this idiom. Ludo Science, don't remember that. Oh, it just controlled me zooming around in that Monopoly shoe car. This was the burger bar. It just dealt with the conveyor belts buzzing and the burgers falling. Is there anything I haven't shown off now? Bingo. Side quest, that's the old one. Mugs versus eggs. Side quests and rules. Add a rule, add a side quest. Complete a rule, complete a side quest. Toggle the reveal, which I think is just... Off you go. It's quite nice, isn't it? Yeah, Sammy's really not that hard. You can make very simple things in it, and if you are so inclined, you can make very complicated things in it. If you really are good at programming or anything else, just make it all in a game engine. There's no need for this. Although, saying that, a game engine might... Well, I don't know how anything works really, but if you want to mess with things that need to be in OBS, like your webcam feed, this is the way to do it. Hello, Grugra Smith. I'm afraid I might just be off. I think I've finished my tutorial. But I will be seeing you this Wednesday, I think. Is Grugra team next week for normal game? Good, that's something to look forward to. Okay. I'm going to sign off very shortly. This is the last call for questions. I'm happy to field any question. And it looks like we'll set up a Sammy place to chat. Maybe, yeah, a Sammy channel on the Discord would be good. If no one uses it, I'll sack it off again, but I wanted to give it a shot. All right, then. Then I'm going to head off and continue enjoying my Saturday. Does anyone want to type outro if I put this in? Do you want to see us off? I'd love to get Pete into Sammy. I'd love to get Pete into Sammy. What a dub that would be. Oh, it's not working. Try again. I've saved the whole board. Try again now. I can't wait for Pete to go mad. I cannot wait for Pete to go mad. I've applied more warp to myself, but often the warps will render me invisible. Like I am somewhere.
Grow.
Ooh. Corvid's out.